None of us can relate to being super cool, super awesome, like superheroes that can run super fast and are super strong. Hello. 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 I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. But I am a local hippie, and today I am going to be talking about villains and side characters. Basically, something that I've known about myself for quite some time now is that I usually enjoy villains, anti-heroes, and side characters more than I enjoy main characters in literature, in television, in cinema. Like, it doesn't matter. I oftentimes relate more with villains and anti-heroes and side characters than with the main character in any of those spheres of entertainment. For the longest time, I didn't know why that was. I didn't know what that was all about. Or I had some idea of what it was about, but I couldn't really put it into words, like why I gravitate towards these characters and not towards the good guy. Does that make me a bad person? Does that make you a bad person if you enjoy villains, anti-heroes, and side characters more than you do the main characters or the heroes or heroines in some movies and books and television series? For example, I've never really been into like Dragon Ball Z, but this is something that I can think of, just like call to mind when I think of this topic, because this was when I noticed that this was a thing for me, is that I preferred Vegeta over Goku. And I always felt like because you knew that things would work out for the main character because they're the main character, the literal story that's being told centers them. So of course, everything that happens is going to ultimately favor them, progress them, further their storyline because the narrative is about them. This is their story. And I think one of the reasons why I think writers do this is because they want to have a character that people are automatically going to be behind. So they make things happen around them and for them that favor them, that progress them. And other characters can have the tendency to be plot devices to further the development of the main character. Even characters that are secondary but very important to the show are important to the show based on how they support and prop up and or challenge the main character. And I think when that happens, sometimes it lends a more compelling story for the anti-hero, for the secondary character, for the best friend character, for the character that is the antithesis of the main character. Essentially, I find that secondary characters, anti-heroes, villains, they usually have very compelling, very complex stories, at least when they're done well. They have these stories because it has to make sense why they became who they are. For instance, with Thanos, or for instance with Lex Luthor. Because another example I have of this is when I was watching Smallville. When I picked up watching Smallville again as an adult recently, I found I started for Tom Welling because he's super cute. I started watching it for Superman, essentially, but I continued watching it. I stayed for the enigma, the complexity of Lex Luthor's character. And maybe that's because I related more to Lex Luthor than I did to Clark. You know what I mean? And like with Lex's upbringing and with his family history, I related in the way that he turned out because of his raising, his upbringing, I should say. I relate a lot more to that than I did to Clark. And then I also found that Clark could be very hypocritical. I would just, because I watch things and I like analyze them, and I would find that there were several characters in the show that were doing things similar to what Lex was doing, as in trying to figure out all of the secrets that Clark was so obviously hiding. Yet Clark would always be suspicious of him. He would be very slow to forgive Lex, even though Lex would always be genuinely apologetic for overstepping the bounds of their friendship and overstepping his place in Clark's life. But because Clark's parents, or more specifically his father, had this grudge against Lex's father, that kind of trickled down to the way that Clark interacted with Lex. And it didn't allow Clark didn't allow himself to see Lex as his own person, apart and away from Lex's upbringing. And that caused friction in their relationship. And to me, it was very hypocritical of Clark, because being that he's Superman, being that he is an alien, and being that he literally lives his life lying to the people that he's supposed to be the closest to, I found very hypocritical that he would be so hard on Lex for maybe not telling him every single secret he's ever had, or telling him about every piece of his very, very, very sprawling past, when Clark is holding this huge secret to his chest. I found it very hypocritical, and that was one of the reasons why I couldn't really get behind Clark. Another one was just that he didn't really, I mean, he did have a struggle, but it wasn't a compelling enough struggle. You being this super stellar, like, extraterrestrial isn't, you know, super strong, a cut above the rest, like, that's not something that the rest of us can relate to. None of us can relate to being super cool, super awesome, like superheroes that can run super fast and are super strong. Like, we can't relate to that. But we can relate to the imperfect Lex, who has this very jaded, kind of cynical attitude towards life because of his very spotty upbringing and the lack of affection that he received growing up. You know, I think a lot more of us can empathize with that because it's real, you know, or that, you know, he makes mistakes, or he does the wrong thing sometimes, but he realizes that, hey, this is wrong, and he's apologetic, genuinely apologetic, and he's also not afraid to stand up for himself when he feels like he's being judged for things that he did not do, i.e. Clark's father holding a grudge against Lex because he hates his father. You see what I'm saying? I think that's more relatable, and that's more everyday than your struggle having to lie to all the people that you love about being an extraterrestrial. You know what I mean? With no weakness, except for the one obscure weakness that is kryptonite, that where the hell are you even going to get that from? You know what I mean? And so I just kind of have seen and have recognized as a reader that I really, really like these side characters, these villains, these anti-heroes, because they usually have a more compelling story, and they usually have a story that as a human being, a flawed human being, I can get behind, I can relate to, and ultimately sympathize with, because that's me. And so I thought that was really unique. I thought that was really cool. And if you have any villains that you really like, I'd love to hear your take on why you love them. I'd love to hear your take on this idea that we tend to like these characters more because we relate to them, because they seem more realistic to us and therefore seemed more fleshed out, better written, because in the human condition, in the imperfect human condition, we can relate to imperfection and to making mistakes and to having this very less than exceptional experience. With that being said, that's going to bring us to the end of the video. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good evening. And most importantly, I hope you read a good book. And I'll see you when I see ya. Bye.